Do you have the resources, the people and money you need to protect the nation? Mr. Olson.
Thank you, Senator. We do, from my vantage point in the National Security Division, we have resources to carry out our priority missions. Obviously, January 6th is a singular event that is stretching the resources of our office and the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C., which is handling that case. There are a number of people have been detailed around the country to support that process.
Do you need more money, any changes in the law to do your job?
At this stage, I don't have any requests for more money or more authority, Senator. Thank you.
Thank you. The Vice President equated January 6th with Pearl Harbor and 9/11. Do you agree with that?
In my view, and if I may just begin by saying, with Senator Durbin and Ranking Member Grassley, it was a day that must have been horrific to be directly involved in or be victimized on Capitol Hill, and I do think it was a singular event. I'm reluctant to compare it to any prior events in our history because, from my vantage point, it was unique and singular.
Yeah. So the courthouse in Portland was attacked 100 nights in a row. Would you consider those people a candidate for domestic terrorism charges?
I know that hundreds of people have been arrested, as we've discussed this morning. I don't have any information about whether or not, in any particular case, they would be subject to.
Well, Senator Hirano said that people use violence for whatever purpose to attack a courthouse for 100 nights in a row. How many people have been charged with the Portland incident? Do you know?
I defer to Ms. Sanborn who had data on the number of arrests. I don't have the number.
Do you know, Ms. Sanborn?
No, sir, I don't have Portland specifically in front of me. Okay. I would, what I was referring to is 250 arrests over this whole summer.
Well, here's my point. January 6th was a bad day. It was a terrible day, and people are being prosecuted. And I would encourage you to have the full force and weight of law against those who defiled the Capitol. But these protests went on for a year. As you can see this photo behind me, they were literally throwing Molotov cocktails trying to kill police officers. And I didn't hear a whole lot from my colleagues on the other side for an entire year. I guess that's what gets me more than anything else. I understand the scope of January 6th, and I hope people are brought to justice. But this is, it's got to be a two-way street. Let's talk about the world in which we live in now that we have a very brief time to do so. The fall of Afghanistan, the takeover of Afghanistan by the Taliban, has that created additional national security threats to our homeland, Mr. Olson?
I think from my vantage point, international terrorism remains a priority, and if I may broaden my answer a bit, just to say that we continue to be very concerned about.
Well, here's my question.
In Afghanistan, ISIS force.
Here's my question. The country is now in the hands of the Taliban. Are al-Qaeda elements present in Afghanistan?
We do see, I would say that we continue to see, we do continue to have concerns about both ISIS and al-Qaeda.
What capability do we have available to us to detect terrorism activity on the ground in Afghanistan after the collapse?
Senator, I think it might be not appropriate for me to go into particular.
Well, is it fair to say we've lost a lot of capability?
I would be reluctant to characterize the level of our capability. What I would say is that it remains a priority.
You can't tell this committee that a lot of the assets we had available to us have been lost because of the Taliban takeover? You can't say that?
Again, I'm reluctant to characterize the level of our intelligence capabilities in Afghanistan.
Have you been to the U.S. border, southern border?
Not, well, 2-3 years ago, I did go to the southern border. Yes.
I would urge you to go back. A lot has changed in the last 2 or 3 years. How many people have come across the border, our southern border, from special interest countries in the last year?
Particular information, possibly Ms. Sanborn does, but I don't have that.
How many people have come across our southern border in the last year from special interest countries?
Sir, I don't have that data.
Have you been to the border?
not in a very long time, sir.
Well, I appreciate both of your service, but it's been 3,000 to 4,000. We've had dozens of people on the terrorist watch list coming across the southern border. Here's some advice. If you need more resources, you'll get it from me. But if I were you, I'd go to the border and check out what's going on, because it's just a matter of time, in my humble opinion, that the broken southern border is going to be an entryway to international terrorists who are going to come here and kill a lot of Americans if we don't change policy. And I would urge you quickly to go to the border, get a handle on what's happening at the border, understand the relationship between the takeover of the Taliban in Afghanistan and the opportunity for more terrorist attacks coming our way through the border. So I would urge you to do that, and I'm surprised you haven't. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Graham. Senator Coons.
Thank you, Chairman Durbin, and thank you to our witnesses today. We are here to have a hearing about January 6th and about the threat of domestic violent extremism. In my view, today we are gathered because just last week we commemorated the anniversary of one of the darkest days in modern American history. On January 6th, I noted, and I want to repeat today, just how grateful I am for law enforcement officers, the Capitol Police, the Metropolitan Police, members of the National Guard from the region and the country, and others who protected all who work and serve in the Capitol. The D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office reports that the angry mob that broke into and assaulted the Capitol assaulted more than 140 law enforcement officers during that day, during that terrible day, during that insurrection. There were 5 officers who lost their lives as a result of that day, and they and their families remain in my prayers to this day, a year later. Those officers didn't come to work that day as Republicans or Democrats, as people from this state or that state, but simply as Americans responsible for working to keep all of us and our democracy safe. And they did their jobs so that later that night the entire Senate could reconvene in the chamber and do ours and certify the results of the 2020 election. So I think we owe it to those officers and their families and our American public to ensure that every extremist who committed an act of politically motivated violence that day is prosecuted. We owe it to them that we ensure that we all learn and correct the failings, the flaws, the challenges in terms of intelligence or law enforcement, resources or planning that led to the events of January 6th. And we owe it to them to take seriously the ongoing threat that we face from domestic violent extremists. Domestic violent extremism also fuels threats to our national security from abroad. I serve on the Foreign Relations Committee. In the last year, I went to more than a dozen countries around the world. Democracy is under threat from nations all around the world, and these are nations that have long looked to us, or whose human rights advocates or democracy advocates or journalists have long looked to us as a model. As I've engaged with leaders around the world, I've heard firsthand how the visible symbol of the storming of our Capitol on January 6th made foreign leaders doubt the durability of our democracy. Our adversaries have trumpeted January 6th as a humiliating sign of weakness and disarray, and our allies have seen it as a troubling sign of the fraying of our society and our democratic system. That's why it is so important for every senator to join our chairman today in continuing to condemn all violence and threats of violence used to advance political goals. Today's hearing is an important step in moving forward on the work to strengthen and heal our democracy. So Mr. Olson, if I might just first ask you, I was encouraged to hear your testimony about establishing a new unit that will combat domestic terrorism. As the leader of the department's mission to combat terrorism, whether foreign or domestic, espionage, cybercrime, other threats to our national security, would you agree that the violent assault on our Capitol on January 6th has undermined our standing abroad?
I would certainly say, Senator, that what happened on January 6th has posed challenges in terms of our status as a democracy. If you look across the country, I've had that conversation with foreign leaders in the national security space. That said, I think how we've responded to it and how we address domestic terrorism. Again, pursuing acts of violence without regard to ideology stands as an example to the rest of the world.
So you'd agree that a failure to adequately respond to that assault with fair, thorough, appropriate criminal investigation and prosecution, if we fail to respond, that would further undermine our standing as a model of democracy and thereby continue to weaken our standing in the world?
I think the world is watching how we respond to this threat, and it can potentially affect our standing in the world. I would agree.
If I might, Mrs. Sanborn, one last question. I think, look, it's gravely concerning to me that there are some colleagues of mine here in the Capitol, in the House, as well as in the Senate, that suggest that the mob that attacked the building on January 6th didn't include domestic violent extremists. But I think the facts are fairly clear. The U.S. Attorney's Office for D.C. published a snapshot of the investigation. There were more than 75 individuals charged with using a deadly or dangerous weapon or causing serious bodily harm to a police officer. And the 140 officers assaulted included 80 Capitol Police, 60 Metropolitan Police Department members. Mrs. Sanborn, attacking police at the Capitol in order to prevent the certification of an election for an explicit political end pretty squarely fits within the definition of domestic violent extremism, doesn't it?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you. And I see I'm out of time. Let me just say I'm hopeful that all of us in this body can put aside rhetoric and speak with one voice and unequivocally condemn politically motivated violence and threats of violence going forward. Thank you, Mr.